The third answer to the question, what is man, that African traditional religions give is that the ideal humanity or man is a being in community. The idea that man is a people in community is in direct conflict with René Descartes' cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. Such expressions of individualism and selfishness are frowned upon and indicate social abnormality for Africans. Rather, Africans in general promote the philosophical worldview known as Ubuntu. The idea of Ubuntu can be summed up in Mbiti's famous axiom, which reads like this: I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am. Tokunbo Adiomo aptly states, quote, African ontology is basically anthropocentric. Man is at the very center of existence, and everything is seen in its relation to the central position of man, end quote. This conception of human beings in the African traditional religions thought nudges Africans to primarily show care for one another and to locate their identity in a community and succeed in life as a community rather than seeking the care of the divine being. Christian theology, on the other hand, is theocentric, making relationship with the triune God the center and goal of human beings. In partial agreement with ATRs, sound Christian theology should advocate or promote the positive aspects of human community, but without decentering God as the primary relationship essential for human flourishing. Hebrews chapter 2, verses 6 through 8 declares the centrality of God in the existence of creation. The author of Hebrews asserts the significance of humanity in God's creation. God cares for and is mindful of humanity without making them the center of existence. In this paper, I will explain what the author of Hebrews conveys about the relationship between God and humanity. This will be followed by a nuanced critique of ATR's conception of humanity in order to provide a better conception of humanity in the African context. Now, sisters in the room, I'm going to use man as a generic expression. Sometimes I'll say humankind. If I say man in the middle, it's a generic expression. So I just want to note that. So what is man? Or what is mankind, humankind? This is a penetrating and perennial question posed by philosophers, theologians, scientists, and the ordinary men and women who strive to find out their identity, role, and purpose in the cosmos. The preoccupation with this question will be more acute in the face of the proliferation of AI and the mechanization of the modern society that is becoming more technocratic towards becoming a utopia. The sexual and identity confusion and illusion of cultures, particularly Western culture, and the violent and senseless wars that have wreaked havoc in nations around the world. In other words, technology, sexuality, and violence will force modern society to grapple with the origin, identity, role, and purpose of humanity. In their striving to answer this important question, Western theologians and philosophers have provided various answers to what is man or what is humankind. For instance, the French philosopher and novelist Albert Camus contends that humanity is absurd. The absurd man toils to uncover meaning that does not exist in this irrational and meaningless world. In Camus' estimation, a human being is without a future. The hopeless and meaningless life of man is aptly embodied in Camus' main French-Algerian protagonist in his novel, The Stranger. According to Marxist ideology, man is a material being, or to be precise, Gattungswesen, or species being, which Karl Marx appropriated from Ludwig Feuerbach, who propagated that, quote, God is not the creator of man, man is the creator of God, end quote. Sigmund Freud, on the other hand, answers the question, what is man, using psychoanalysis by stating that man is a sexual being that needs to fulfill its neurotic and eroticized desires without any inhibition. Our dissatisfaction and frustration is not because of the fall or sinful nature. Rather, in his estimation, the source is the unmet sexual desire propelled by the libido. Charles Darwin almost blurs the difference between humans and animals. For Darwin, humans are animals at a higher level. In his own words, quote, "Nevertheless, the difference in mind between man and the higher animals, great as it is, certainly is one of degree and not of kind," end quote. Despite this minor difference, Darwin insists both humans and apes have a common origin or ancestor. His theory has mutated in every direction and has since been applied in dehumanizing scientific research like eugenics and the social Darwinism that classifies some people as inferior beings. Here it suffices to mention the Orwellian maxim, all men are created equal, but some are more equal than others. Finally, René Descartes proposes that man is composed of mind and body. For him, the human body is a machine that cannot function without the mind. The mind, which is tasked with thinking, takes the highest place in Descartes' understanding of human beings. His well-known expression, "I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum," underlines that one's, or the individual's existence, can be proved by one's thinking. Please note that here, man is the sum of his thoughts, or a woman is the sum of her thoughts. This is a relativistic and individualistic expression. In other words, one's existence does not require the approval of others, and the person who is experiencing illusions, doubt, questions, or confusion can prove his or her existence based on their thinking and experiencing that same illusion. That's the West. Now, how about in Africa? Man according to African traditional religions. Africans have also provided answers to the question, what is man? The wider African cultures, African traditional religions in particular, assert that humans are created by God. Swayelim Sidholm rightly observes that the diverse cultures of Africa have one thing in common, quote, "Man was created by God and he has his origin in him," end quote. As such, humanity originated and is sustained by God or a certain supreme being. Again, Sidholm notes, quote, "God is, hence man is," unquote. However, African traditional religions lack the idea that humans are created in the image of God. Joe Kapoloyo, a Zambian theologian, indicates the absence of the concept of imago Dei in African traditional religions when he writes, quote, "This language," that is the image of God, "is never applied to the relationships between people and God, except, of course, in the appropriate translation of the Word of God into many African languages," end quote. Despite the absence of the concept of the image of God in African traditional religions, God, or a supreme being, is identified as the source and origin of humanity. So the first answer ATRs provide to the question, what is man, is that humanity is God's creation, whoever this God or supreme being might be. Nevertheless, as stated at the outset of this paper, African traditional religions are human-centered. The creator God or supreme being is discentered to make room for the anthropos. John Esembiti, the late Kenyan theologian and New Testament scholar, is often quoted for his remarkable insight on this issue. So it's vital to quote him at length. He writes, quote, "African philosophy is basically anthropocentric. Man is at the very center of existence, and African people see everything else in its relation to this central position of man. God is the explanation of man's origin and sustenance." Not here. It is as if God exists for the sake of man. The spirits are ontologically in the mode between God and man. They describe or explain the destiny of man after physical life. Animals, plants, land, rain, and other natural objects and phenomena describe man's environment. And African peoples incorporate their environment into this deeply religious perception of the universe, end quote. The extensive quote from Mbiti underline for us that the fact that African anthropology is, I call it anthropocentric theism. This means God is acknowledged as the creator of humanity, but at the same time, he is denied the limelight, the central position above and among his own creation. African traditional religions also address the question, what is man, by answering that humans are both physical and spiritual beings by nature. The body is essential to connect with the physical world, whereas the spiritual nature is vital to connect with the spiritual realm or the spirit realm. The African conception of man or humanity, particularly the view of African traditional religions, is that man has both body and spirit, but the body is insignificant without its unity with the soul or heart or the spirit or spirit. Please note that this is not similar to the Platonic idea of man that emphasizes the spiritual and denigrates the physical. It simply means that the body is useless without its unification with the non-physical essence or element. Heinz Jahan underscores this fact when he writes, quote, biological life and spiritual life meet in the human being. In a concrete human life, neither one nor the other can be present alone. It is, he writes, not the pure biological life that is embodied in man, nor is the living human person ever without a shadow, end quote. That means they are inseparable. Man is body and spirit. The body allows the African to have an integral part in the natural world. However, this physical interaction occurs in tandem with his or her interaction with the spirit world. The spiritual composite of his nature or her nature enables him or her to interact with the ancestors or spirit beings. It is this spiritual essence that distinguishes man from animals, according to ATRs. Animals lack the spiritual component man embodies. This is the reason why Africans prize being indwelled or possessed by a spirit, as it gives them an edge to be part of the ancestors when they transition to the other side of the spirit realm. When I was reading, I found one thing, that the worst insult that you can say to a man, according to ATR, is to call a person an animal. To answer the question, what is man? ATRs also offer a robust answer by stating that humans are beings that are composed of body and spirit with an accent on the spirit. African traditional religions vehemently contend that humans are not animals. The fact that animals and humans are different is not only true for proponents or members of African traditional religions, but it is also a point stressed among Christians in Africa. The Ethiopians here know the Fikr Eska Maqabir. In a very popular Ethiopian novel, Love Unto Crypt, Addis Ababa stresses this theological fact. One of his characters, a preacher, exclaims this, quote, the difference between humans and animals is not that humans walk on 2 feet. Even a chick walks on its 2 feet. Well, then, is it the language that makes humans different than animals? No. Animals have their own languages as well. The main difference between humans and animals is man's ability to control himself. Don't worry about the soteriology right now. Humans differ because they can control their hunger, greed, adultery, and other similar feelings that they share with animals. If a man were pushed by hunger to eat whatever he wishes, to possess whatever he has seen, or to have sex with any woman he wishes, he could become an animal and not a human. Since man is created with the union of flesh and spirit, he is the battlefield where secular and spiritual feelings come alternately and incessantly, end quote. In addition to this, an Ethiopian evangelical singer by the name Dereje Kabede once responded to the Marxist-Leninist regime of Ethiopia that propagated that man is a social animal who is not created by God by singing, I am not a monkey, I am an image of God. I have been given dominion over creation. For the Ethiopians, ዝንጀሮ አይደለሁም የእግዚአብሔር አምሳል ነኝ ከፍጥረታት በላይ ስልጣን የተሰጠኝ. The point here is that Africans insist that humans are not animals because they possess spiritual elements along with their body. This is contra the Aristotelian contention that man is a human animal. The third answer to the question, what is man, that African traditional religions give is that the ideal humanity or man is a being in community. The idea that man is a people in community is in direct conflict with René Descartes' cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Such expressions of individualism and selfishness are frowned upon and indicate social abnormality for Africans. Rather, Africans in general promote the philosophical worldview known as Ubuntu. The idea of Ubuntu can be summed up in Mbiti's famous axiom, which reads like this: I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am. And another Bemba proverb captures this very well. So I'm going to quote from a Bemba proverb. A human being lives with people or in the company of other people. He who lives with animals will be eaten. The corresponding meaning of Ubuntu is humaneness. That is characterized by compassion, generosity, love, care, and treating others as family members. Ubuntu is considered to be a gift from God. There's a capital G or small g in the paper here. And a virtue that can be inculcated and nurtured by doing good works. Hence, the ideal man, the authentic person, is the one who practices Ubuntu. According to Mnyandu, quote, human beings are what they do, unquote. Lack of Ubuntu, the practice of individualism, is a sign of animalism and bruteness, according to African traditional religions. In ATRs, African traditional religions, man is, quote, society-based existence. It's a mouthful, but that's how it's written, unquote. John Taylor, in his The Primal Vision of Christian Presence in African Religion, observes that, quote, the sense of the personal totality of all being and of a humanity which embraces the living, the dead, and the divinities fills the background of the primal worldview. But the foreground in which this solidarity becomes sharply defined and directly experienced is the life of the extended family, the clan, and the tribe. This is the context in which an African learns to say, I am because I participate. To him, to an African, the individual is an abstraction. Man is a family, end quote. When men and women do not practice Ubuntu, it brings disharmony and conflict. Any offense committed or good works omitted within the community disrupts the unity, the good life, and may bring about disaster upon the community. These all affect the well-being of the community. A person who does not carry out his or her own responsibility of Ubuntu breaks the code of the community and becomes an evil, selfish person that should be excluded from the community. In other words, sin, if we can call the offenses done sin, according to ATRs, is committed against the community, the family, and not God. African traditional religions are cognizant of the distance between God or the supreme being and humanity. However, they do not provide any kind of solution to address the problem of sin committed against God. Again, John Mbiti's observation is valuable here when he laments, quote, this remains the most serious cul-de-sac in the otherwise rich thought and sensitive and religious feelings of our peoples. It is perhaps here, then, that we find the greatest weakness and poverty of our traditional religions compared to the world religions like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, or Hinduism, unquote. So he argued, John Mbiti argued, that we should not call ATR a world religion because of this. Also, another vital weakness in Africans' conception of Ubuntu is that it could be limited to close family or tribal members that exclude other people from benefiting from Ubuntu. Jerry Ireland, an American missiologist, goes further and argues that, quote, Ubuntu has proven an ineffective instrument in quelling Africa's xenophobic conflicts, end quote. Ireland offers a solution to address the weakness of Ubuntu by providing koinonia as the New Testament concept that could redeem the philosophy and practice of Ubuntu in Africa. Doing so will enable Christian Africans to offer the principles of Ubuntu across familial, tribal, and clan and ethnic lines. The goal and purpose of Ubuntu is maintaining relational harmony and experiencing the good life as a result. God is not the goal of Ubuntu. The horizontal aspect of Ubuntu takes precedence over the vertical relationship with the divine. Therefore, Ubuntu, as good as it is with its so many positive qualities, has a significant theological deficiency. God is not the goal or the center of Ubuntu, but humanity is. In conclusion of this section, ATR's conception of humanity is that they are created by God, they are composed of body and the spirit, they are people in community who are expected to practice Ubuntu, to maintain social harmony and have a good life. While these answers to the question, what is man, are commendable, from a biblical theological perspective, the absence of the centrality of God, or God as the telos of humanity in ATRs, make the answers somewhat inadequate. Then how does the author of Hebrews depict the origin and identity and purpose of man in Hebrews chapter 2? Now let's go to Hebrews chapter 2. So if you have your Bible, you can turn there. I'm going to do a bit of exegesis there. It is preceded by Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 14, whereby the author argues that Jesus is better than the foregoing Revelation, Old Testament, the prophets and God's angels, because he is the divine Son of God and the second person of the Trinity who made eternity and the heavens and the earth. The exposition on the divinity of the Son is then followed by an argumentation on the true humanity of the Son in Hebrews chapter 2. Hebrews chapter 2, 6 through 8 is located in 2, 5 through 18, where the author contends that the divine Son is fully human. In this passage, the Son's degrading humiliation, substitution, and death, the incarnation of the Son, and its significance and purpose is described. It is in this passage where we see the Son's solidarity with humanity. At Hebrews 2:5, the author offers the reason why the congregation must pay more careful attention to the great salvation they heard, because it is not to the angels God has subjected the world to come. In other words, angels who are already identified as God's ministering spirits will not rule the world, but the divine Son will. Hence, the Son is better than the angels. Then the author proceeds to offer proof for this claim by citing the Septuagint Psalm 8, 5 through 7, or in English, 8, 4 through 6. Now let's do some exegesis here. Chapter 2, 6a, the citation is introduced by indefinite markers. Somewhere, someone testified saying. It appears that the author does not want to mention both the location and the speaker of the psalmic passage. Amazing. He was citing Psalm verbatim, but now he doesn't want to. The reason for his reticence in citing the exact location and the speaker of the quotation is to highlight the fact that the psalmic quotation is the divine testimony. In other words, the author desires to shift the attention from the human speaker to God, to indicate that the testimony belongs to God. 2:6b, it says this: what is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you care for him? The Old Testament quotation poses a rhetorical question to highlight God's care for humanity. The original context of Psalm 8 betrays David's amazement of God's handiwork in creation, particularly the creation of man in God's image. Psalm 8 centers on God, his creating ability, and his greatness. The psalm opens at 8:1 saying this: O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. The centrality of God is depicted by setting God as the sole recipient of respect, glory, majesty, praise, and honor, because he is the creator, the Lord, and the setter. God's greatness and splendor is reflected in his act of creation, particularly the creation of humankind as his pinnacle handiwork. God made humanity in his own image so that humanity can rule over the works of God's hands. Sigurd Grundheim rightly states, quote, as God's image, humans are called to rule the earth on God's behalf. Their glory and honor are not innate, but connected with the assignment they have. They have been given by God to extend his rule throughout the world, end quote. The psalm also notes that God cares for humanity despite man's insignificance. The psalmic quotation is an explicit gateway to the incarnation of the Son of God in the subsequent section. Scholars read the citation in two ways, either anthropologically or Christologically. Those who advocate for the anthropological reading of the quotation point out that the passage is a reference to humanity collectively. As such, they render the passage, the Greek text, as, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? A son of man that you care for him. The theological ground for the anthropological reading is Genesis 1, 26 through 28, where God created Adam and Eve in his own image to rule over his creation. Others, on the other hand, read the quotation Christologically. The Christological reading agrees with those who advocate for the anthropological reading that God intended humanity to rule over creation. However, the author of Hebrews appropriates the psalmic passage to the Son of God, the new Adam. It is logical to take the citation first Christologically and then anthropologically. After all, the author has clearly given us the precedent for such an understanding. The Son, who is the appointed one to inherit everything, has enabled those who are and will be associated with him to inherit salvation. In other words, the restoration of humanity to rule over creation can only happen in the Son's mediatorial function as God's prophet, priest, and king. Consequently, the Christological reading of Psalm 8 has primacy. What is man? The Hebrew term enash or ben Adam in Psalm 8:4 is employed here to indicate the mortality, weakness, and frailty of humanity. God's greatness and otherness is incomparable to humanity's weakness and mortality. The psalmist himself answers this question, what is man? Later in Psalm 144:3 and 4. O Lord, what is man that you regard him, or the son of man that you think of him? Man is like a breath. His days are like a passing shadow. In other words, humanity, or the son of Adam, is ephemeral and finite. Although he nowhere cites Psalm 8 or Psalm 144 or Hebrews chapter 2 verses 6 through 8, Kelly Kepick's recent book's title captures the idea of ephemerality and finitude perfectly. His book's title is You Are Only Human. Or, in the words of Carmen Joy Imes, on our own, we're not enough. However, humanity is not insignificant in the eyes of God. In reality, God is mindful of humanity because he sent his Son to be the incarnate God so that he can execute the task of purification for sins in order to restore everything lost through the first Adam. This fact is ascertained in the author's utilization of the Christological title, the Son of Man. The purification and restoration of humanity's dignity, dominion over creation, and relationship with the divine could only be a reality through the incarnation. Sin necessitated the incarnation, the divine Son becoming the Son of Man. The offense is not merely committed against humanity, or the Ubuntu, the ideal humanity. Here and in the rest of Hebrews, we see that sin is an offense against God that requires divine intervention. The divine Son becoming man with blood and flesh is the only definitive solution to the problem of sin. The vertical reconciliation with the divine through the sacrificial and victorious works of Christ enables a horizontal reconciliation by bringing many to become siblings in Christ. The terms mimneskomai, to be concerned about, or episkeptomai, to look after, underline the significance of humanity before God. God cares for, and actively looks after his creatures in his own image. This is particularly evident in the Son's act of offering the purification for sins on the cross. So, my favorite Hebrew scholar, Philip Hughes, rightly states this, quote, "The incarnation of the Son of God is the great and ultimate proof of the importance of man. It is not, however, in egocentric self-approval that the word of man finds his expression, but in his status as God's creature and his constitution in the divine image." End quote. The Amharic translation of the term episkeptomai rightly captures the term's intended meaning, to gobenyo zend, which means to visit. God appeared in the flesh to help humanity so that he could deliver his creation from its slavery. A prominent Ethiopian evangelical singer, Tasfai Gabiso, links the descent of God from heaven and proffering help to those who are in bondage of transgression when he sings, "When God assists descending from the heavens, when he wipes out all offenses by his justice, haven't you seen the trap broken, the captive freed, and telling about his redemption?" እግዚአብሔር ሲረዳ ከሰማያት ወርዶ በደልን ሲያስወግድ በቅንነት ፈርዶ አላያችሁም? ወጥመዱ ሲሰበር ምርኮኛው ማዳኑ ሲናገር። 2:7 You made him for a little while lower than the angels. The Son of Man was made lower for a brief moment. The expression brakuti in the Hebrew text of Psalm 8:6, which is ma'at, denotes the degree of humiliation, the humiliation of the man, the humanity. Hence, it is rendered as a little rather than for a brief moment. Some scholars argue that the Masoretic text, meaning that is the degree, not time, should be maintained in Hebrews. Nonetheless, the humiliation of the Son of Man for a brief moment makes more sense here. Man was made lower than the angels for a short time. As Kistemaker rightly notes, this does not mean that the administration of God's creation is given to the angels because they are superior to humanity. At Hebrews 2:5, the author has already made a point that the angels will not govern the world to come. The temporary humiliation is a reference to nothing other than Christ's incarnation, his sufferings on earth, and ultimate humiliation and sacrifice on the cross. Christ's humiliation began when he took the form of a slave and the nature of man. But the pinnacle of him being lowered is evident in his obedient death on the humiliating cross. The Andemta tradition, the Ethiopian commentary tradition, comments that Jesus became lower than the angels because God gave him suffering and death so that we can benefit from his passion. But the humiliation was momentary. The Son of Man's utter suffering, humiliation, and sacrifice was followed by honor, exaltation, and crown. God crowned the Son of Man, Jesus, with glory and honor. According to Bidag, Stephanao means, quote, to recognize distinguished service or performance with an award, honor, reward, or crown, end quote. The Son's humiliation from birth to crucifixion did not go unnoticed. The Father recognized the Son's accomplishment, obedient suffering and lowliness. Consequently, he exalted him. The Son's exaltation is already stated in the introduction of Hebrews. His sacrificial activity culminated in the Son's enthronement at the Father's right hand. A nuanced critique of ATR's conception of humanity. African cultures, African traditional religions in particular, are correct to denote that humanity is created by God, composed of body and spirit, who should be in community and seek unity, harmony, and a good life. However, as I have pointed out briefly earlier, there is some theological deficiency in African traditional religions' understanding of the nature of humanity. First, in the practice of Ubuntu, the goal and purpose of humanity is ultimately human-centered. Again, in the words of Mbiti, quote, it is as if God exists for the sake of man, unquote. Nonetheless, we have seen in Hebrews and Psalms that God cares for humanity, but God does not exist for humanity. According to Richard Gaiman is on point when he describes the tendency of African traditional religions when he writes, quote, "The focus of ATR is indeed on man himself. African traditional religion centers on man. The whole emphasis is upon man gaining the power needed to live a good life. Life revolves around man and his interests and needs," end quote. On the other hand, Hebrews chapter 2 verses 6 through 8 echoes the ancient tradition that creation is God's handiwork and exists for God's splendor and praise. As such, Hebrews chapter 2 verses 6 through 8 provides a correction to the anthropocentric thought of African traditional religions by offering God the center position. God is and should be the goal and focus of Africans, and Christian Africans in particular. The author of Hebrews is explicit when it comes to who exists for whom. How? Chapter 2 verse 10. "For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering." In order to have the centrality of God in the African context, it's important to bridge the chasm between God and humanity, the gospel here, a problem to which ATRs are unable to provide a solution. When relationships between humanity takes precedence, God takes the back seat, and the vertical relationship becomes relatively unimportant. In other words, African traditional religions are weak when it comes to the doctrine of sin or total depravity and the solution to the problem of sin. As stated above, in African traditional religions, sin is committed against the community, not necessarily against God. Although there is a grain of truth that sin affects our relationship with each other, Christian theology and the biblical evidence stress that sin first and foremost affects our relationship with the divine. Hebrews chapter 2 verses 6 through 8 and the literary context of this pericope indicate that God became man, the divine became incarnate in order to provide purification, sanctification, the forgiveness of sins, so that the broken divine-human relationships could be fixed. The lack of the doctrine of total depravity and the corruption of the Imago Dei is a key weakness in African traditional religions anthropology. Here, again, Hebrews chapter 2 provides a vital corrective to ATR's conception of humanity's sin or fall by highlighting that the offense is primarily committed against God, but that there is a God-ordained solution to the problem of sin, which is the God incarnate, the new Adam. Hebrews chapter 2, 6 through 8, and its wider context also offers a slight correction to the idea of people in community, in conjunto. Indeed, all are created in God's image, and the desire for unity and having a good life in community is commendable. We agree. However, the reality of sin affects the desired peace, harmony, and unity. In contrast, because of the Son of Man, the new Adam's sacrificial and victorious mediatorial work on behalf of humanity helps to create a new community, the new people of God. Hebrews chapter 2:10 exclaims that God brings many sons and daughters to himself through his divine Son. Indeed, ATRs consider humanity as a family. Hebrews chapter 2 nuances that by stating men and women in Christ are the new family, the new community that are sanctified by the sanctifier, Jesus Christ. The point here is the genuine humanity, or as known as Ubuntu, true people in community with a lasting harmony is only possible if people are associated with the Son of Man, the divine Son, and are sanctified, purified, and brought closer to God. This ideal Ubuntu, the ideal humanity, African traditional religions are unable to offer to Africans. In conclusion, African traditional religions, anthropocentric theism fails to provide a correct conception of humanity because of the fact that they decenter God and focus on the centrality of humanity. This anthropocentric thought of African traditional religions in turn soft pedals the problem of sin and considers the human-to-human relationship as more significant than the divine-to-human relationship. In particular, Hebrews chapter 2 verses 6 through 8 offers a corrective to ATR's conception of humanity by centering God as the origin, goal, purpose, and focus of humanity.